Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English. We turn in our study of Dante's Inferno now to Cantos 29 and 30. We're going to study these together because we are now in Circle 8 Bolgia, or pocket number 10. These are the falsifiers. Now, that's kind of a strange, maybe, word. In other words, people who are like alchemists who try to fake somehow counterfeit currency or money, and as well people who took on other identities. No kidding, identity theft ends up in Inferno. Now we're actually going to ask this question in this lecture because we're getting to the end. This is the last Bolgia of circle number 8, and then we have circle 9 to come. And of course, if we're at Canto 30, we know we only have 4 more cantos left. And so we're already beginning to play that game of the criticism of the construction of Dante's afterlife hell. In other words, who's in, who's not. For example, where do we see certain kinds of sins that have not yet been fully articulated? Several of you have already asked about, for example, what we might consider, if you visit a prison today, one of the major groups are people who have done sexual violence of a kind that's perpetrated on others, especially children, pedophiles, and the like. Where are those scenes? Really? For example, a student asked me, really? So, for example, we can have this horrific scene in the last canto of Muhammad being gutted, but where are the pedophiles and what happens to those who abuse children? Was it that those kinds of sins did not occur? Ha ha, right? We're altogether too familiar. And in fact, ironically, we're going to have some of those references made, as often will be made by Dante, through the allusions of mythology. Jupiter, for example, who will go after a certain girl and rape her, and for that there's a fallout because Jupiter's wife Juno is upset. Again, I want you to be critical of this text, but to be critical of the text, you have to know the text. So let's go to work with it now. Now, if you haven't been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, the AP folder down the left-hand side there, I very much recommend that you do that. For sure, I'm assuming that you've watched our lectures on the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and everything up through Augustine's Confessions. We've also given individual lectures of the earlier cantos. Let's just review them quickly to know where we've been. We only get to do this a few more times in our looking backwards. In Canto 1, 7th of April, 1300, Dante at 35 years of age, he is lost in a dark wood and he needs help. Virgil shows up, Canto 2, we'll hear about why he's there. Beatrice has sent him, and the invocation of the Muse. Canto 3, we have the inscription of hell, abandon hope, all ye who enter here, and the uncommitted will be here. Canto 4, limbo in the circle 1, the unbaptized pagans, Homer, Virgil, of course Aristotle there. Cantos 5, 6, and 7 of the incontinent. Canto 5, circle 2, the jacked lovers, now Dido and Francesca and Paolo. Now no question, we've got adulterers here, that is to say acts of sin, acts of sexual congress. But notice, in this circle, you have those that were consenting. In other words, they wanted to have sex. It was just that they had sex inappropriately, adultery and the like. Canto 6, circle 3, the gluttons and Chaco. Canto 7, circle 4, the prodigals and the avaricious. And circle 5, Styx, the wrathful and the sullen. It's interesting, students have pointed out, the kinds of sins that Dante sees as sins, of course, along with the church. Sins like, for example, gluttony, obviously. The question we were asking earlier is one that falls under the larger rubric of lust. And again, often they're going to be understood to somehow fit in this kind of category. Canto 8, we have Phlegus, who will take them across the river Styx. Felipe Argente is there. They get to Dis, but they can't get in the city of Satan. In Canto 9, the gates of Dis are opened by an angel. In Canto 10, we have Dante's conversation with Farinata and Cavalcante. Again, these are political kinds of focus. Let's just say that to answer the earlier question. Dante, far more interested in political sins often than he is in individual sins that would be of a sexual nature. Not to say that we don't get to that here in a bit, right? In Canto 11, really critical, Dante will give us Virgil's map, cartography of the rest of hell, predicated on much of his study of Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. We begin with the violent at Canto 12. Circle 7, round 1, we'll have the Mentor and the Centaurs, the violent against neighbors, the Phalangia there, and the River of Blood. Canto 13, we have round 2 of Circle 7. This is the violent against self, suicides. Canto 14, Circle 7, Ring 3, we have the violent against God. These are the blasphemers, and of course Campanius is there, crucified, very Promethean-like though, not giving in at all. Cantos 15 and 16 of Circle 7, Ring 3 are, of course, violent against nature, and here we have the Sodomites, and especially Brutino Latini, and then in Canto 16 we have the three Florentines. Now, while no question, this is Dante dealing with sex, no question he is dealing, of course, with issues of sexual perversion as the church and Dante understands it. Remember, any act that would not be specifically for the act of procreation and having children is considered unnatural. Usually when the question of, well, where will rapists go, sometimes they're understood to be here. Canto 17, Circle 7, Ring 3, these are the violence against art. These are the users after they have the one user stick his tongue out at Dante the Pilgrim. Onto the back of Geryon they go, and they write down now to the last of our major divisions. If the first, again, is that incontinence, and then we'll have the violent. Finally, we have the fraud division, and we enter Circle 8, and it's 10 bolgias or pouches. Okay, starting in Canto 18. Malebolge, of course, is the title that's given to this. Those evil pouches. And in Circle 8, Bolgia number 1, we have the panders and the seducers. We would probably see the rapists falling in here, although Dante, again, not specific to that issue. And then in Bolgia 2, we have the flatterers, who are going to eat poop because in life they spoke poop. In Canto 19, we have Bolgia 3, the simoniacs, and Dante the Reformer will jack all over Pope Nicholas III and, of course, Boniface VIII. In Canto 20, we have Bolgia number 4, the fortune tellers, this including Tiresias with the head turned around backwards. They're crying the tears through the cleft of the buttocks. Canto 21-22 we did together because that one is Bolgia number 5, the berators, you'll remember, and we have that funny kind of farting demons scene. Canto 23, we've got Bolgia 6, the hypocrites, wearing their heavy robes, and Caiaphas crucified on the ground. Cantos 24-25 we dealt together because that's Bolgia 7 and the thieves, and we have that famous up on your feet passage, and men turning into snakes, and the transmorphing that will happen, and it's kind of a very strange, powerful scene. Cantos 26-27 we have Bolgia number 8, the false counselors. Here we have, of course, Ulysses. We have Guido, who again is going to make some comments about Boniface VIII. Canto 28, this is Bolgia 9. These are the schismatics, those who create all kinds of discord. And as we said, we have no question, we have Muhammad here treated really poorly. And we, of course, will say this is inappropriate probably for us today to be speaking about the Holy Prophet in this way. But of course, in Dante's time, it was completely acceptable. And we also have Mosca here, who is going to be the originator for Dante, or the reason why the Guelph Ghibelline contest is raging on. We now come to Canto 29-30, which we will treat together again as Bolgia number 10, the last of the Bolgias for Malebolgia, and this is the falsifiers. Again, the hope is that you read this information on your own and then use me. Our learning theory is always to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We do this again through our reading by answering 3 guiding questions. What does the text say? What does the text mean to A, three messages, and 2 messages themes? And to B, we're concentrating on symbolism, irony, as well as Dante as poet, as politician, and as philosopher. We'll comment on, obviously, on all 3 here. And finally, in Canto 3, in level 3 of questions, we ask, how can I relate to this information in meaningful ways? At 3A, how can I relate to the Iliad and everything else we've studied in AP and anything else that I know? And then finally, at 3B, how can I relate to this information personally? The critique questions that we already set you up for are going to be a classic exemplar. Okay, let's do a real quick, brief summary of Cantos 29-30. We're on, as we said, to Bolgia 9, the falsifiers. We're going to have a terrible description of illness and disease, like the suffering unimaginable. If you put all of the hospitals in the history of the world together with all of this suffering, we're going to see a scene that will prepare us for our study of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, what's called the famous Grove scene, where Conrad will re-describe this, where bodies are just kind of lying around in the worst imaginable condition. The other thing we're going to hear is a story from Cappuccio's story, which will remind us of a text that, if we're biblical readers, we will appreciate. That text comes from Luke chapter 16. Now, there are a number of you who spend time in Sunday school or readers of biblical text who will say, or Saturday school or Friday school, who will say, you know, it's interesting, you haven't messed around with this Luke 16 passage. There is a passage in the New Testament where Jesus tells an interesting story. It goes something like this. I'll just read it to you. There was a rich man. By the way, this story is often referred to as the rich man and Lazarus. Don't confuse, by the way, this Lazarus with the one who dies and is raised 3 days later by Christ in John 11. That's a different Lazarus. There was a rich man. This is a parable story, all right? There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. And of course, if we're biblical readers, we're reminded of the book of Job. And Christ definitely, in telling the story, wants to elicit and reference the story of the book of Job, right? That terrible moment when he has all those boils on him and he cuts them with shards and lets dogs lick on them to gain some relief. It's a disturbing picture of suffering. And as we've said in our discussions on theodicy, this was always one of the powerful images. Here we have something very similar, right? Lazarus he's jacked up, we would say. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side, that is to say, what some seem to understand as some sense of afterlife heaven. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades, and this is the mention now of Hades. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire. It's one of the few places in all of the New Testament where we get this image of hell as being a place of torment where one is in agony and yet can still speak, right? In other words, notice you got some sense of the physical body in the torment. Much of Dante's Inferno is constructed around this passage. Now, why I left this passage until here will be made self-evident in our study in a moment. But we're told that Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things while Lazarus received bad things? But now he is comforted here and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place. We'll meet this chasm in more detail, by the way, in Milton's Paradise Lost. A great chasm has been set in place so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. In other words, you can't do it. Now in Dante, we're going to have the ability to get across that chasm to get to Purgatorio and Paradiso. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. We're going to see brothers actually in these cantos. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. Now, this story, no question, stands behind so much of the work that we are about to do. So let's turn to it now, and let's pay attention to the ways in which that story informs what Dante is doing here in compelling ways, okay? So here we go. We are now ready for Canto 29. The mass of people, wounded so curiously, had made my eyes so drunk, they had a passion to stay weak. Now we're talking about the previous Bolgia, number 9, and of course all the dismemberment and all the mutilation that was going on. But Virgil said to me, what are you staring at? It's going to be interesting. At the conclusion of 30, we're going to get a similar kind of injunction. What are you staring at? Why let your vision linger there down among the desolate and the mutilated shades? You found no reason to delay like this at any other pit. Consider, if counting them is what you plan, this valley extends along a circular route for 22 miles. Dante's attempt to try to show just how large this one pit is. In other words, we got to get going. You can't just stand here and look at all these terrible sights. And already the moon is under our feet. The time we are allowed has now grown short. In other words, it's early afternoon. And more is to be seen than you have seen here. If you had given heed, now this is Dante the Pilgrim, if you had given heed to what my reason is for looking, perhaps you would have granted a longer stay. Now, this is interesting because Dante, for the first time in the poem, will show a little bit of attitude to Virgil. Meanwhile, my guide went on, where Virgil's not interested. And in his steps I followed while I answered, but told him too, inside that hollow, where for a little lapse of time I gazed so steadily just now, I think a spirit of my own blood laments. Now, this is Gary del Ballo, who was Dante's father's first cousin. He was accorded a troublemaker. He was killed, but not yet avenged. In 1310, he was killed by this guy. Finally, there was by 1310 there was a revenge murder by the Scadetti family back again. So we have this interesting thing where now all of a sudden hell becomes personal for Dante. And he says, I was looking for one of my family members. That's why I was looking at all these people. The answer, Virgil. Let your intelligence distract itself with thoughts of him no more. Attend to other things while he remains down where he is below the bridge. For there I saw him. This is Virgil. I saw your relative. I saw him with his finger point you out and fiercely threaten you. The reason threatening, we're going to find out, is because the vengeance has not happened. Now, in Florence of his day, in Dante's Florence of his day, it was not against the law. It was actually an acceptable part of the law. A family can get vengeance on another family, right? In other words, Dante's family hasn't done their job yet, and for that, he has every reason to be upset. And I can hear them call him Gary del Bello, and again, this is the family member. So complete was your preoccupation with the one who once held Altafort, that is to say, the Baron de Born, the guy who's holding his own head. You can imagine why that would maybe distract you. You never set your eyes in his direction, that is to say, in your relative's direction, till he was gone. And now, Dante the Pilgrim. Oh my guide, I said, his violent death for which as yet no vengeance has been done by any of those he shares dishonor with is what has made him full of indignation, and that is why he continued on his path without addressing me, and with this action he makes my pity for him greater yet. So we continued in our conversation, walking the ridge until we reached the spot where the next valley could first be seen below down to the bottom, had there been more light. Up above, Malebolgia's last cloister now, this is pocket number 10, right, the falsifiers, where we could see its lay brothers, that's interesting because they're all kind of laying supine in many contortions, under us. Their strange laments beset me, each an arrow whose shaft was barbed with pity. And at this, I lifted up my hands and blocked my ears. Now, this has always been one of the questions. Which is the most disturbing in Inferno? For Dante the Pilgrim, and as well for us as readers, is it the sights? Is it the smells? You'll remember that even they have to stop. That's what whole Canto 11 is about. Oh, this is so bad, the stench. Is it the sounds? Many have argued that of all of those three, the sounds would be the worst. And so he blocks his ears. The suffering was such, if one could place all of the sick who endured disease's course in Vallecina's hospital from July all through September because of the malaria, especially in the summertime, and all the sufferers in Mimara and Sardinia to lie all in one ditch together, so was this place, from it a stench like that which usually is given off by festering limbs arose. By the way, we're reminded of our own Walt Whitman as a great American poet who during the American Civil War, he wrote about this very thing of those field hospitals and all those amputated limbs and those dying bodies and the corpses laying out there and the stench that was in that field hospital right outside of Washington, D.C. and how horrific that was. Dante now is going to give us some seriously challenging and grotesque images. Some have argued that the images that are coming now are more disturbing even than the ones where people are getting cut up and mutilated or even turned into snakes, because here we have a kind of punishment that we're familiar with when we have been really sick and with fever and we're really thirsty, but we can't drink because we're going to vomit if we drink, and that feeling of just being really, really disoriented. All of that is coming now for us. To continue. Keeping as ever to the left, on down we came to the ridge's vital bank. The fosse grew clear to my sight, in which the one who serves as minister of the Lord on high, unerring justice, we're back, of course, to Plato's Republic, all of the things Dante wants to remind, Dante the poet wants to remind us, all of the things we're about to see. This is justice. This is all predicated on acts of love. Well, again, theologically and philosophically, we can debate that, right? Lets her punishments rain upon the shades whose sin is to falsify. The word rain will give us the word water. Here, building so much off of our story of Luke 16, we have the torment of thirst. Let's write that one down. And that, for some have argued, is the worst imaginable kind of punishment. You never can get a drink, and yet you never can die. Or not unappreciate the thirst, right? They're already dead. Upon the shades whose sin is to falsify, she has recorded them upon her scroll. I think it could not have been sadder to see Aegina's whole population fallen ill when such corruption crowded through the air, that down to the small worms every animal succumbed, and afterward the poets aver, as certain and the ancient populace was restored out of the seed of ants, than to see there, all through that murky valley, how a horde of shades lay languishing in scattered heaps. By the way, this is, with just one word, Aegina, we have the story of how Jupiter will rape Aegina. Again, it's fascinating, right? It makes you wonder, where is the critique, the punishment for those who violate others sexually, and especially children? Like, where is that information? Dante may be wanting not to be too controversial in dealing with some of those. That's usually one of the answers. But notice here, Jupiter will rape Aegina. She will have a son. He will be named Achaeus, and Achaeus will name an island after. Will name the island. An island will be named then, and then Juno will come down and jack everybody on that whole island with illness, and they all die in horrific ways. And then the ants are turned back in to people. This, by the way, is a story from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Book 8, line 523 to 660. Some of you have said to me, why isn't Metamorphoses on our curriculum? It should definitely be there, and you're absolutely right. It's an oversight. We have to be able to know Metamorphoses. One of the answers, though, is if you read Dante, you've read a lot of Metamorphoses, because so many of the key stories are being referenced here. He continues by telling us about these shades. And by the way, that word shade will come back in our study of Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Just put that in your notes, as well as T.S. Eliot. We'll come back to it with T.S. Eliot. We'll come back to this with Camus' The Plague. Of course, the book of Job has already been mentioned. Any attempt to try to explain human suffering, especially as people are languishing in scattered heaps. One lay 72. One lay upon his belly. Another poured over his neighbor's shoulders, or perhaps moved on all fours along the dismal track. This moved on all fours we literally will see in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. In silence, walking with the